The morning was busy and bright, with sunlight streaming through the tall windows of the downtown bank. People were moving in and out, some carrying briefcases, some holding shopping bags, and some simply coming in to deposit or withdraw money. Among them walked a woman, dressed professionally but casually enough to blend in. She had a calm air about her, moving with confidence and a quiet purpose. She carried a check and some documents ready to handle her personal banking. She did not draw attention to herself, and yet, in a way, she seemed aware of everything around her. She noticed the tellers, the security cameras, and even the small details most people would overlook. She walked up to the counter and greeted the teller politely, handing over the check. The teller looked at the paperwork, scanning it carefully, and something about it seemed to make her pause. A frown crossed the teller's face, and she excused herself for a moment. Soon the bank manager appeared, walking briskly and looking concerned. He glanced at the check and then at the woman, his suspicion clear. The woman stayed calm, smiling gently, explaining that the check was legitimate and that she had confirmed the details before bringing it in. The manager seemed hesitant, and within moments he spoke into a phone and called for security. The woman's expression did not change. She simply continued standing there, her posture relaxed as if she knew this could happen and was ready for it. Minutes later, 2 uniformed police officers arrived. They moved quickly, approaching the woman with serious expressions. One of them read from a piece of paper, accusing her of attempting to deposit a fake check. The woman looked at them steadily, her voice calm and even. She explained again that the check was real, that she had verified it, and that she had no intention of breaking any laws. The officers, however, seemed convinced that she was guilty. Their tone was firm, and they spoke as if they had dealt with situations like this countless times before. The bank was quiet, the only sound being the low murmur of other customers and the occasional shuffle of feet. People watched, some whispering to each other, unsure of what was happening but sensing the tension in the air. The woman remained composed, answering questions clearly and politely. She offered to show additional identification and paperwork, but the officers insisted she was under arrest. The handcuffs were brought out, and she was instructed to put her hands behind her back. She did so without struggle, her calmness never breaking. Her eyes remained focused, noting the details of the officers' actions, the movements of people around her, and the layout of the bank. Even in what could have been a humiliating situation, she maintained control over her emotions and her presence. Customers began to pull out their phones, some discreetly, some openly recording the scene. The tension in the bank grew, as everyone sensed that this was not a routine arrest. Some people whispered about the injustice they were witnessing, while others speculated about what might have led to this confrontation. The woman, still calm, looked around and made subtle gestures to indicate she was okay. She did not panic, did not raise her voice, and did not react in anger. Her composure was remarkable, drawing a quiet respect from some of the onlookers even in such a confusing situation. As she was led out of the bank, she continued to answer questions patiently. She gave her name and identification, but the officers did not recognize it. Little did they know she was far from an ordinary civilian. She was an FBI agent, trained for situations exactly like this, capable of handling high-stress encounters without losing focus. Her training allowed her to observe, assess, and respond in a way that minimized risk, even when the situation seemed unfair or escalating. She understood the importance of staying calm and measured, and she applied that knowledge perfectly, ensuring that nothing spiraled out of control. Inside the police vehicle, the atmosphere was tense. The officers whispered to each other, trying to determine what to do next. They discussed procedures and protocols, confident they were following the right steps, yet completely unaware of the truth. The woman listened quietly, her mind calculating and observing. She noticed their mistakes, their assumptions, and the subtle signs of uncertainty that they were trying to hide. She did not speak unnecessarily, but when she did, her words were clear and measured, providing just enough information to keep the situation under control without revealing her true identity. Meanwhile, the bank staff watched from inside, their curiosity mixed with concern. They had witnessed a dramatic event unfold in what should have been an ordinary morning. The check that had seemed suspicious now seemed secondary to the tension and confusion that had erupted. The woman's calm demeanor contrasted sharply with the hurried movements and frustrated tones of the officers. Even in a moment that could have been chaotic, She maintained a sense of dignity and composure, quietly demonstrating control over the situation. As the vehicle moved slowly through traffic, the woman remained alert. She assessed the positioning of the officers, the vehicle, and the surroundings. Her training allowed her to remain prepared for any sudden changes, any escalation, or any potential threat. She considered her options carefully, knowing that patience and observation were as important as any immediate action. Her mind was focused, calm, and ready, fully aware that the officers were acting on incomplete information and assumptions. At the same time, her FBI colleagues had been notified. Internal systems had flagged her location and the unfolding incident. They began coordinating, prepared to intervene if necessary, but confident that she could handle herself. She had faced difficult situations before, and this was simply another test of her professionalism and patience. Despite the misunderstandings, she never lost control of her actions or her composure. She understood the importance of measured responses, even when others were reacting emotionally or impulsively. Back at the bank, the atmosphere remained charged. Customers continued to watch, some shaking their heads, some speaking quietly to each other. The bank staff tried to maintain normal operations, but the tension was palpable. The officers, still confident in their authority, had no idea who they were dealing with. They assumed they were arresting an ordinary suspect, unaware that the woman was an FBI agent capable of handling far more complex and dangerous situations. The contrast between their perception and the reality of the situation was stark, and it added to the drama unfolding quietly in the background. The woman's calm, polite responses, her steady gaze, and her careful observation of every detail made her seem almost untouchable. She had the presence of mind to manage the situation without escalating it, to stay respectful and composed, and to maintain control without confrontation. It was a display of skill, patience, and professionalism that would later be noted by her colleagues and even the officers involved. Once the truth became known, as the vehicle moved further from the bank, the woman remained aware of her surroundings, her thoughts focused and clear. She had handled arrests, threats, and unpredictable situations before, and this incident, while frustrating and unnecessary, was manageable. She knew that revealing her identity at the wrong moment could complicate matters, so she chose to observe and respond carefully. Her goal was simple: to ensure the situation remained safe and controlled, protecting herself and everyone involved. The morning, which had begun like any other, had turned into a dramatic scene of misunderstanding, authority, and professionalism. The woman's presence in the bank had been ordinary, yet the reaction to her actions had created a ripple of tension and uncertainty. Customers, officers, and staff alike were caught in a moment that seemed larger than life, unaware of the true nature of the situation. The woman remained the calm center of this storm, demonstrating the power of composure, intelligence, and experience in a moment of crisis. Through it all, she maintained her dignity, her patience, and her awareness. She answered questions politely, observed carefully, and ensured that the situation did not escalate. Her training as an FBI agent allowed her to remain calm and effective, even when others acted out of fear or assumption. She became an example of professionalism under pressure, showing that control and composure could turn a potentially dangerous or humiliating moment into a managed and contained experience. And as the morning continued, the story of her calm strength would soon be revealed in ways that no one in that bank could have anticipated. The police car moved slowly down the street, the engine humming as the woman sat quietly in the back seat. She remained calm, her posture straight, her hands folded in her lap despite the cuffs that lightly pressed against her wrists. The officers in the front spoke quietly to each other, their voices low, but she could hear enough to know that they were discussing procedures and trying to figure out what to do next. They assumed they were handling a routine case, a simple matter of law enforcement, but they had no idea who they were transporting. Her mind was alert, scanning every detail of the car and the street outside. She noticed the way the officers handled their radios, how they glanced at mirrors, and the slight hesitation in their movements. Every moment gave her more information, allowing her to assess the situation without giving herself away. She remained polite and cooperative, answering their questions with calm, clear words, never raising her voice or showing frustration. She knew that patience was her greatest advantage in moments like this. Meanwhile, The bank staff were still processing the morning's events. The scene had left them shaken and confused. They could not understand how a customer depositing a simple check could end up being handcuffed by police. Some of the customers had shared recordings on social media, and within minutes small notifications began popping up, alerting a few people that something unusual was happening at the bank. The tension of the incident started spreading beyond the immediate location, though the full context was still missing. Inside the car, the woman's thoughts were calm, but focused. She considered her options carefully. Her training had taught her to remain composed and to observe everything without jumping to conclusions or making sudden moves. She knew that revealing her identity too early could create confusion or even risk. At the same time, she was aware that her colleagues at the FBI were monitoring the situation, ready to step in if needed. She trusted her training, her experience, and the systems in place, knowing that she had the skills to handle this situation herself if necessary. The officers, still unaware of her true identity, continued their conversation in the front seat. They questioned the legitimacy of the check and the story the woman had provided. They seemed frustrated that their authority was not being challenged with aggression or resistance. She listened carefully, noting their mistakes and misconceptions. She could see the subtle signs of hesitation and doubt in their behavior, and she silently cataloged them for future reference. Her calm demeanor was a stark contrast to the officer's confusion, making her seem even more collected and in control. The woman's mind wandered slightly as she considered the reactions of those at the bank. She imagined the whispers, the questioning faces, and the silent judgments of the onlookers. She understood that many people were likely forming opinions based on incomplete information. She had witnessed situations like this before in her professional life, where assumptions and misunderstandings could quickly escalate if not handled carefully. She remained determined to ensure that no harm came to herself, the officers, or anyone else involved. Her phone, kept discreetly in her bag, vibrated lightly. She could feel it but did not immediately reach for it. Her colleagues were checking in, monitoring the situation through internal systems. They were aware of her location and of the unusual circumstances, but they trusted her judgment. She responded subtly, sending a brief update that indicated she was safe and managing the situation. This small communication ensured that the team was prepared to intervene if necessary, while also giving her the autonomy to handle the encounter herself. The ride continued, the car weaving through city streets and passing familiar landmarks. The woman remained calm, occasionally observing pedestrians or traffic, her senses tuned to everything happening around her. She noted potential hazards, escape routes, and exits, though she knew she would not need them. Her goal was simple: maintain composure, gather information, and ensure the situation remained safe for everyone. The officers in the front seat were unaware of the level of skill and experience she brought to this encounter. They assumed they were dealing with an ordinary suspect, yet she was trained for far more complex and dangerous situations. As the car approached the station, she could see the small changes in the officers' behavior. They were tense, their movements slightly more cautious. They whispered to each other more frequently, seeking reassurance and validation from one another. She continued to provide polite, factual answers, avoiding any emotional cues that might inflame the situation. Every detail was observed, every reaction noted, every subtle movement considered. Her training allowed her to remain composed and effective, even when surrounded by confusion and uncertainty. Back at the bank, customers were still buzzing with curiosity. Some had shared their recordings online, and the video began circulating quietly. People commented on the scene, expressing disbelief and concern over what had unfolded. The teller who had initially questioned the check now understood that the situation had escalated far beyond her expectations. She reflected on how quickly a routine day could turn into a dramatic and stressful event. The staff worked to reassure other customers, though the incident had left a lasting impression on everyone present. Inside the police station, the woman was carefully guided to an interview room. She remained calm and composed, answering routine questions with clear, concise responses. She observed the officer's body language, noting the subtle signs of tension and uncertainty. She could see the internal struggle of the lead officer as he tried to reconcile what he knew with the increasingly strange circumstances. Her patience and composure began to influence the room, creating a subtle shift in the atmosphere. The woman knew that revealing her identity too soon could cause unnecessary complications, but she also understood that timing would be important. She planned her approach carefully, waiting for the moment when it would have the greatest impact. She wanted to maintain control while ensuring the situation remained safe and respectful for everyone. Her calm professionalism set her apart from the confusion and frustration that surrounded her, demonstrating a level of skill and experience that few could match. Meanwhile, her colleagues monitored the situation closely. Internal systems tracked her location, the officers involved, and the ongoing interactions. They coordinated quietly, prepared to intervene if necessary, but confident that she could manage the encounter. Her ability to remain calm, composed, and observant ensured that she maintained the upper hand, even without revealing her true identity. She became the center of control in a situation that could have easily become chaotic. The hours passed slowly, but she never lost her composure. She answered questions, provided documentation, and maintained a polite professional demeanor throughout. Every action was deliberate, every word measured, ensuring that the officers understood her cooperation while remaining unaware of her true role. Her presence was steadying, even as confusion and uncertainty swirled around her. Finally, the officers began to realize that this was no ordinary case. Subtle cues, inconsistencies in their assumptions, and the woman's unshakable composure led them to pause and reconsider. She continued to answer questions calmly, providing clarity without revealing too much. The tension in the room remained, but she had established a sense of control that allowed her to navigate the situation safely. As the day continued, the woman's professionalism and calm demeanor began to influence the officers. They became more cautious, more attentive to detail, and more willing to listen. She had turned a potentially tense and chaotic situation into one that was controlled and manageable. Her training, experience, and patience had allowed her to maintain safety, dignity, and respect, demonstrating the importance of composure in high-pressure situations. By the end of the morning, the stage was set for the next critical moment. The woman had maintained her calm, gathered information, and subtly influenced the situation without confrontation. She had ensured that everyone remained safe and that the incident did not escalate. Her colleagues were prepared, the officers were cautious, and the story of what had begun as a routine bank visit was becoming far more complex than anyone could have imagined. The true revelation of her identity and the resolution of the incident were still to come, but she had already demonstrated the power of patience, composure, and professional skill in a moment that could have easily turned dangerous or humiliating. The hours inside the station felt long and heavy, yet the woman remained composed, her calmness unshaken despite the circumstances. She had been led into a small interview room, the fluorescent lights casting a sterile glow on the walls. The officers continued to speak in low tones, discussing procedures and what to do next. They were still confident in their assessment of the situation, but a subtle uncertainty had begun to creep in. Her calm demeanor seemed almost unshakable, and it made them pause in ways they had not expected. She sat quietly, taking in the room, noting the layout, the location of doors, the positions of chairs, and the angles of the cameras. She observed the officers as carefully as they were trying to observe her. Every gesture, every inflection of voice, every shift in posture provided her with information about their state of mind. Her training had prepared her for far more dangerous encounters, and she handled this situation with the same precision and attention to detail that she would in the field. The lead officer finally spoke directly to her, asking her to explain once again why she was in the bank and why she had the check. She answered clearly and calmly, recounting the events in chronological order. She explained that the check was legitimate, that she had verified it, and that her presence in the bank was for routine personal business. She did not raise her voice or display any emotion other than polite clarity. Her patience seemed endless, and every word she spoke subtly reinforced the truth of her story, even as the officers struggled with their assumption. Outside the interview room, her colleagues at the FBI were quietly monitoring the situation. They had tracked her movement from the bank and were following the incident as it unfolded. While they had confidence in her ability to handle herself, they were ready to intervene if necessary. The woman knew this and drew strength from that knowledge, allowing her to focus entirely on the immediate situation without distraction or fear. Her awareness of backup quietly bolstered her confidence, even though she had no intention of escalating the situation unnecessarily. Back in the room, The officers were growing increasingly tense. They had never anticipated the level of composure displayed by the woman. Their earlier confidence, which had been firm and unyielding, began to give way to subtle doubt. The way she spoke, the way she responded without hesitation, and the way she remained calm in the face of their accusations unsettled them. It was as if she was quietly in control, even without any overt display of authority. At one point, one officer attempted to intimidate her by mentioning potential charges and consequences. The woman listened carefully, nodding politely, her expression neutral. She did not react with fear or anger. Instead, she calmly reminded them of her cooperation and her willingness to provide documentation and identification. Her tone was firm but courteous, signaling that she understood the seriousness of the situation without contributing to tension. Her demeanor seemed to gently shift the energy in the room, creating a subtle atmosphere of reflection and reconsideration. Meanwhile, the officers' radios buzzed intermittently, delivering updates from other officers outside. The woman remained attentive, listening carefully without revealing any unnecessary reaction. She noted the patterns, the urgency in the voices, and the small inconsistencies in the information being shared. Each detail was catalogued silently in her mind, giving her a clearer picture of the situation and how she might navigate it safely and effectively. The officers occasionally glanced at each other, clearly struggling to reconcile their initial assumptions with the unfolding reality. The woman remained a calm observer, her presence creating a quiet tension that made them second-guess some of their actions. She did not press the matter, did not argue, and did not raise her voice. Her patience and steady presence seemed to silently influence the room, guiding the officers toward more careful consideration without a single overt action. Time passed slowly, yet she felt every second as part of a calculated rhythm. She was aware of the cameras in the room, and the possibility that the conversation might be recorded. She maintained careful attention to her words and movements, ensuring that nothing could be misinterpreted. Every response was measured, every gesture intentional. Her training in observation, negotiation, and crisis management was evident in the way she handled the prolonged scrutiny. Even in what could have been a humiliating or stressful situation, she maintained dignity, professionalism, and control. Outside the building, the situation at the bank had continued to ripple through social circles and online communities. People were discussing the incident, sharing videos, and speculating about the events that had unfolded. Customers and employees alike reflected on the unusual and tense encounter, aware that what they had witnessed was far from ordinary. The woman's calm handling of the initial confrontation, even under suspicion and public scrutiny, had left a lasting impression on those who had observed the situation. Back inside, the woman continued to answer questions politely, providing clear explanations without unnecessary elaboration. She demonstrated patience that few could match, staying calm as the officers shifted between doubt and tentative trust. She subtly guided the conversation without dominating it, allowing her calm reasoning to take effect. Each response reinforced the truth of her story, creating a foundation for the next steps that would eventually lead to resolution. Her mind also considered the officer's psychology. She recognized the way authority could become clouded by assumptions and bias. She was aware that her identity, if revealed too soon, might create further tension or complicate matters. She calculated the optimal moment for disclosure, considering both safety and effectiveness. Her presence was quietly influencing the room, without her needing to assert overt control. The officer's growing uncertainty was a reflection of the calm, patient authority she projected without ever raising her voice. During one brief pause in questioning, the woman took a moment to breathe deeply, maintaining her calm and mental clarity. She reflected on the day's events and the power of composure. In high-stress situations, she knew that emotional reactions often worsened outcomes. Her ability to remain poised, rational, and observant allowed her to navigate the complex scenario safely and effectively. The officers, meanwhile, were beginning to sense that there was more to the woman than met the eye, although they could not yet identify what that was. The tension in the room remained, but it had shifted subtly. The officers' movements were slower, their voices quieter, and their questions more careful. They seemed to be testing boundaries, trying to reconcile their initial assumptions with the undeniable calm and clarity of the woman before them. She remained polite, cooperative, and attentive, guiding the interaction toward a safe and manageable outcome. Her actions, or sometimes deliberate inactions, demonstrated a quiet mastery of the situation. Throughout this time, the woman remained aware of external factors, her colleagues' monitoring, the social media ripple, and the potential impact on the bank's staff and customers. She understood that perception could affect outcomes and that every word and action mattered. Her professionalism and composure were not just tools for personal safety, but for maintaining order and ensuring that the entire situation could be resolved without harm. She was quietly orchestrating a path to resolution, observing every detail while projecting calm authority. As the interview continued, the officers became more cautious. They seemed to sense that their assumptions were flawed, and their questions shifted to verification rather than accusation. The woman answered each question with patience, providing documentation and explanations with clarity. She subtly established control through logic and calm, without confrontation or aggression. Her demeanor created an environment where tension could be diffused, even as uncertainty lingered. Outside the room, the world remained unaware of the extraordinary nature of the encounter. The bank, the witnesses, and even some online viewers only saw fragments of the story. What they did not know was the depth of training, experience, and composure that the woman brought to the situation. She was quietly shaping the outcome, ensuring that the resolution would be safe, dignified, and effective. Each moment reinforced her ability to handle a stressful scenario with professionalism and calm, preparing the way for the revelation that was still to come. The woman's patience, focus, and unwavering composure continued to define the unfolding events. Even as the officers questioned and reassessed, she maintained her calm, subtly influencing the room through observation, measured responses, and quiet authority. The incident, which began as a simple bank visit, had evolved into a complex encounter requiring intelligence, patience, and strategic awareness. And through it all, she remained the steady center, quietly preparing the ground for the moment when her true identity would finally be revealed, ensuring that the situation could be resolved with safety, clarity, and professionalism. The room remained quiet for a few moments as the woman continued to sit calmly, her hands resting lightly on the table. The officers were still processing what they had seen and heard over the past hours. They had questioned her thoroughly, checked her identification, and reviewed the documents she had provided, yet the air of certainty they had carried into the situation was beginning to waver. She had answered every question with clarity, patience, and calmness, leaving no room for doubt about the legitimacy of her check or her intentions in the bank. Finally, the lead officer leaned back slightly in his chair, running a hand over his face as if to shake away the tension. He spoke in a lower tone than before, asking her directly about her occupation. The woman looked at him with steady eyes and a calm expression, knowing that this was the moment she would need to reveal her identity. She reached into her bag and pulled out her badge and identification card, placing them carefully on the table. The badge gleamed under the fluorescent lights, and the identification clearly indicated that she was an FBI agent. The officers froze, their expressions shifting from confusion to disbelief. They had spent hours treating her like a suspect, unaware that they were dealing with a federal agent with authority far beyond their own. The room seemed to hold its breath as the realization sank in. Their previous assumptions, their accusations, and their confidence all seemed suddenly misplaced. The woman remained composed, her calm demeanor unchanged by their reactions. She explained quietly and clearly that she was indeed an FBI agent, and that her presence in the bank earlier had been for personal reasons. The check she had deposited was legitimate, and the events that had unfolded were a result of misunderstanding and assumptions. She spoke calmly but firmly, emphasizing the importance of professionalism and careful verification in all situations. Her words carried authority, not arrogance, and the officers could feel the weight of her experience and training. The lead officer looked down at the badge, then back at her, struggling to find words. He admitted that they had made a mistake, their assumptions having been based on incomplete information. The other officer nodded in agreement, still absorbing the shock of the revelation. The tension in the room began to shift, moving from confrontation to reflection. They had acted on suspicion and authority, yet they had been unaware of the true nature of the person they had been dealing with. The woman continued to speak, explaining the importance of understanding context, observing details and remaining calm under pressure. She shared briefly, without disclosing sensitive information, how quickly misunderstandings could escalate and why it was important to approach situations with caution and professionalism. Her words were measured and thoughtful, and the officers listened intently, realizing that their training alone had not prepared them for a situation like this. Outside the interview room, her colleagues at the FBI had been monitoring the incident, ready to intervene if necessary. The revelation of her identity allowed them to relax, knowing that the situation was now under control. They had confidence in her ability to manage the encounter, but seeing the officers' reactions in real time highlighted just how tense the situation had become. The careful balance of calm observation, patience, and authority had prevented what could have been a dangerous escalation. Back at the bank, the news of the revelation spread quickly among the staff and remaining customers. The idea that the woman they had seen handcuffed was actually an FBI agent left many in awe. Some reflected on the officer's assumptions and the quick judgment that had led to the arrest. Others considered the professionalism and composure that the woman had displayed throughout the incident. The story became a lesson in observation, patience, and the dangers of making assumptions based on appearances. In the interview room, the officers began to relax, their initial tension slowly giving way to a sense of humility. They had treated the situation with what they thought was authority and control, but the woman's calm and composed handling of every interaction had revealed their misjudgment. The lead officer apologized sincerely, acknowledging that he and his colleague had acted hastily. The woman accepted the apology with grace, emphasizing that the most important outcome was that no one was harmed and that the situation was now fully resolved. The conversation shifted to a more practical level. The officers asked questions about protocol, verification, and what steps could have been taken differently to avoid such a misunderstanding. The woman provided guidance and advice, drawing from her training and experience without being condescending. She spoke about careful observation, the importance of remaining calm under pressure, and the need to verify facts before making assumptions. Her insights were practical and clear, leaving a lasting impression on the officers. The atmosphere in the room continued to shift, becoming calmer and more reflective. The officers began to appreciate the importance of patience, careful assessment, and professionalism in their daily work. The woman, despite being the center of attention, remained humble and focused on ensuring that the encounter ended with safety and understanding. Her approach demonstrated leadership not through authority or intimidation, but through calm, intelligent guidance and clear communication. Meanwhile, the social media posts and videos from the bank had begun to attract attention. The story of a woman being handcuffed over a check, only to be revealed as an FBI agent, captured widespread interest. People commented on her composure, her professionalism, and the lessons that could be learned from the incident. The narrative highlighted the importance of patience, observation, and avoiding assumptions. It became a story not just of a misunderstanding, but of the power of calmness and intelligence in resolving tense situations. Back in the interview room, the woman continued to provide explanations, answering questions about verification procedures and the appropriate handling of similar situations. She emphasized the value of remaining composed, the importance of communication, and the need to consider context before taking action. Her words were clear, practical, and grounded in real-world experience. The officers listened attentively, absorbing the advice and reflecting on how they could apply it in the future. Time passed, and the room gradually shifted from tension to understanding. The officers had gained insight into the complexity of the situation, and the woman had successfully conveyed the importance of careful observation and professionalism. The encounter, which could have ended in conflict or embarrassment, had been transformed into a learning experience. The woman's calm, measured approach had guided the interaction from misunderstanding to resolution. Eventually, the officers escorted her out of the interview room and made arrangements to ensure her safe departure. They had come to respect her composure, intelligence, and professionalism. The experience left them with a deeper understanding of how quickly situations could escalate and the importance of remaining calm and observant at all times. The woman, for her part, remained focused on the resolution, ensuring that the encounter ended safely and respectfully. As she left the station, the woman reflected on the morning's events. She had handled a tense, potentially dangerous situation with patience, composure, and intelligence. She had navigated misunderstanding, assumption, and authority without confrontation or aggression. Her training, experience, and calm demeanor had turned a challenging encounter into a successful resolution, leaving both the officers and the public with a valuable lesson in professionalism and human behavior. The story of the arrest, the misunderstanding, and the revelation of her identity spread beyond the bank and the station. People began to discuss the lessons learned, emphasizing the importance of calmness, observation, and the dangers of quick assumptions. The woman's actions highlighted the power of patience, the value of experience, and the importance of maintaining dignity and professionalism in high-pressure situations. Her presence had transformed what could have been a negative experience into a story of composure, skill, and understanding. Through it all, the woman remained grounded, focused on the practical resolution of the situation and the safety of everyone involved. She had demonstrated that intelligence, calmness, and professionalism were more powerful than authority alone. The officers had learned a valuable lesson. The bank staff had been reminded of the importance of verification and observation, and the public had been given a glimpse into the quiet strength and capability of a trained professional. The encounter, though stressful and unusual, had ultimately ended with respect, understanding, and a clear demonstration of the power of calm, measured action in the face of misunderstanding. The woman stepped out of the station into the crisp afternoon air, her posture calm and composed, reflecting the control she had maintained throughout the entire incident. The officers had accompanied her to ensure her safe departure, their expressions a mix of relief and newfound respect. The morning had been tense, the hours inside the station heavy with misunderstanding and assumptions, but now, as she walked away, the situation was fully resolved. She moved with quiet dignity, aware that the ordeal had left a lasting impression not just on those involved, but on everyone who had witnessed or heard about the events. The bank, now returning to a semblance of normalcy, buzzed quietly with conversations about what had happened. Staff members discussed the incident with a mixture of disbelief and admiration, realizing how quickly an ordinary morning could turn into something extraordinary. Customers who had recorded videos and shared them online continued to comment and share, amazed at the calm and professionalism displayed by the woman who had been arrested. Her composure and intelligence had captured attention, transforming what might have been a humiliating situation into a powerful example of patience and skill under pressure. As the news of her identity spread, more people began to reflect on the lessons embedded in the story. The officers, though initially embarrassed by their mistake, came to understand the importance of careful observation, verification, and maintaining professionalism. They had learned that assumptions-based